Get it butter toddy. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Gopi Jana Ballabha Giridhara Dhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Vishabham Sabadala Chikajaya Stoter Sisima Si Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya Vishabham Sabadala Chikajaya Stoter Sisima Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Go Premanandi. We'll be reading and speaking today from Srila Prabhupada's concluding words to Chaitanya Charitamrita after the Ancha Leela has ended. But first, a little something about the song we sing, Jai Radha Madhava, Srila Prabhupada's special gift to us. Om Agana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militang Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This song Jai Radha Madhava was, as I said, Srila Prabhupada's special gift. Written by Bhakti Vinod Thakur, this song, Srila Prabhupada told us, is the perfect picture of the spiritual world with all its intimate relationships. Interestingly, some of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, with their own vision and own perspective, thought this song they called him Swami Maharaj. Why is Swami Maharaj giving such an intimate song to the rest of the world? Yet, others would say he doesn't go deep enough. He's just giving Bhagavad Gita, nothing beyond that. Yet, Srila Prabhupada gave us Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. The depths, the heights of bhakti. So sometimes you can't please everyone, even such an empowered emissary from Vaikuntha. Sometimes others, they find faults. But when we sing this song, Jai Radha Madhava, we can, especially today, meditate on Srila Prabhupada's giving us the deepest possible realizations. Of course, we'd all like to be at that level. But he's showing you the peak potential of bhakti. I remember in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada explained that his books are like a chemist. They contain prescriptions for all varieties of devotees, from the least advanced neophyte to the Mahabhagavat. He said it's all there. He reminds you of a piano player who can play all the keys on the piano from one end to the other. Inconceivable genius, spiritual genius. So when you hear this Jai Radha Madhava by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, don't take it for granted. Srila Prabhupada is giving the potential, the possibilities for everyone to go to the topmost heights of the spiritual world. Today, of course, we're celebrating Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. Normally, the disappearance day of someone is a tragic day of memory. And certainly for Srila Prabhupada's disciples, his disappearance was the greatest shock in life. Of course, those who were gathered there in Vrindavan during Srila Prabhupada's final days with us were not surprised that Srila Prabhupada was leaving. But for so many of us in the rest of the world, we thought there was a hope for a miracle. Although Srila Prabhupada kept telling us, he's going, he's going. Each Prabhupada disciple, and you can ask each one of them, can remember what he or she was doing on that day when they heard that Srila Prabhupada had departed. Maybe sometime today, His Holiness Ramai Swami can tell us his experience of that day. I remember being in Los Angeles, and we were all hoping Prabhupada would stay with us somehow. He had been through such crises before and miraculously recovered. So the whole temple was out on book distribution, begging Krishna, please, if you so desire, please cure Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave us that special prayer because devotees wanted to beg Krishna, but Prabhupada's a pure devotee. He said, if you so desire, Krishna. Even in his departure, he held high the banner of pure bhakti. Everything is up to Krishna. So I remember we were all out on book distribution for days beforehand, even the BBT. But then on my desk arrived chapter 13 of the 10th canto, the manuscript. And I was reading it before putting it into production. And I was just shocked by how personal it was and how Prabhupada was cracking jokes. In that condition, he's cracking jokes about the four-headed Brahma and the four-headed scientists. So I read the whole chapter. I had the manuscript on my desk in my hands. It had just arrived from Vrindavan. But then, in the middle of the chapter, I got this premonition. This is the last of the Bhaktivedanta purports. And I just burst out in tears. And sure enough, 2 days later, after greeting the deities in Los Angeles, the announcement was made that Srila Prabhupada had departed. He had given us instruction in the 4th canto of Bhagavatam, in that famous extended Paranjana allegory. He explained that there are two aspects, Vani and Vapu, the instruction of the spiritual master and his physical presence. And using the example of the departure of one king in the 4th canto, it's an allegory. And leaving the queen behind, Srila Prabhupada wrote so beautifully about how a disciple responds when the spiritual master departs. And how the real disciple takes upon his or her shoulders the mission of the Guru, the instructions of the Guru. And in fact, he writes that a real disciple would rather give up the body than neglect the order of the spiritual master, neglect carrying on the instructions of the spiritual master. During my time in filing all Srila Prabhupada's correspondence, both letters both to him and from him, I saw one very interesting point where he explained that physical association with the Guru is for neophytes. I was shocked. I said, well, let me remain a neophyte. Because we were all vying somehow to get Srila Prabhupada's personal attention, his physical attention. Somehow or other, we were hoping we would have that. But then some understanding, some deeper understanding finally came to me when I read Srila Prabhupada writing that if you judge who is dearest to him, who is closest to him by simple physical proximity, he said, well then, the mosquito is the best devotee. But he said, what's the purpose of the mosquito? It's so close, but it's to bite him. So that dispelled some of my misunderstandings. But still, everyone was vying for the physical association of Srila Prabhupada. So as I said, normally celebrating a disappearance day is tragic. And certainly all of Prabhupada's disciples can remember what they were doing on that day. If you were a non-devotee, karmic worker, you remember what happened when some famous politician was assassinated, or when World War II started, or when World War II ended, whatever. But for devotees, Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, we all have that etched in our consciousness, what we were doing. In the fourth canto of Bhagavatam, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, and Prabhupada echoes that in his purports, as he often does. The queen, bereft of the husband, was thinking, who will protect me now? Similarly, the disciple thinks, where is my shelter now? So there is lamentation, there is devastation, no doubt. In fact, Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavatam 4th canto that upon the disappearance of the Guru, the disciple is broken-hearted, lamenting, crying. But then the disciple takes up the Vani, the instructions of the Guru. And who helps? The Paramatma, the super soul in the heart. So I'd like to read from the end of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada's concluding words, which are very instructive. Now, Chaitanya Charitamrita was finished by Kaviraj Goswami in the year 1615. So about 360 years later, Srila Prabhupada is writing about his completion of the translation of Chaitanya Charitamrita, 360 or so years later. So his reflections are very deep and can help us appreciate the monumental nature of the disappearance of such an emissary from Vaikuntha. We'll read a bit and discuss a bit. Concluding words. Today, Sunday, November 10th, 1974, corresponding to the 10th of Kartik, Chaitanya era 488, the 11th day of the dark fortnight, the Rama Ekadashi. We have now finished the English translation of Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. In accordance with the authorized order of His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj, my beloved eternal spiritual master, guide, and friend. So let us pause and meditate on how Srila Prabhupada is always wrapping himself in the order, the authorized order of his spiritual master. He's explaining, I executed this rendition of Chaitanya Charitamrita on the order of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who told him, distribute knowledge of Krishna throughout the world, especially in the English language. So, based on that order, Srila Prabhupada took on the task of presenting Chaitanya Charitamrita, as well as, of course, Srimad Bhagavatam. And note that he calls his spiritual master, my beloved spiritual master, yes, guide and friend. This is a point explained in the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, how to be friends with the Guru. It doesn't mean you slap him on the back and, hey, mate. No, you befriend his instructions. You befriend his mission. It's in the verse there in the 7th canto. Brahmachari Gurakule Vasandanto Tirohitam. There in the purport, Prabhupada explains, you take the mission of the spiritual master deep in your heart. That is how to show friendship. And that kind of friendship brings the best kind of relationship. And then he explains in these concluding words about disappearances, which are normally, such explanations are sad. You can think back to the meeting between Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked Ramananda Roy, what is the most painful condition of existence? And Ramananda Roy replied, separation from a pure devotee is the greatest pain. But it doesn't end there with just the pain of separation. There is the association with the Guru through his instructions. So we read, although according to material vision, His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, passed away from this material world on the last day of December 1936. I still consider His Divine Grace to be always present with me by His Vani, His words. So note the distinction. Although according to material vision He's gone, I consider, and these are Prabhupada's realizations, he's explaining his internal dynamics. So we should take this very deeply into our hearts. I still consider His Divine Grace to be always present with me by His Vani, His words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words, and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not. But Vani continues to exist eternally. This is a realization we should all strive for, because it's the nature of this world that Physical presences come, physical presences go. But we're given something much more substantial than ephemeral, temporary appearances and disappearances. In Bhakti, we're given something much more substantial. The eternal existence of Vani, associating with the spiritual master through the instruction. As Prabhupada explains in the 4th canto, somehow or other you'll see Krishna in that way. Of course, we are very impatient. Where is Krishna now? But some or other, if we stick to following the instructions of the spiritual master, we see Krishna through those instructions. And that capability of Vani is eternal. So Prabhupada encourages us, in fact, insists. He says, therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. As I said, Prabhupada's disciples were all longing for a moment with him. Anything. A look from the eyes, a smile, anything. I remember Prabhupada was giving out cookies once in Los Angeles. All the devotees stormed up to the Vyasasan, and he put a cookie in everyone's hand. And I held out my hand, he put in a cookie, and then pushed down on my hand. I said, oh. You might think, it was such a little thing. But I knew he had pushed on my hand longer than he put the cookies in others' hands. So I was... Naturally, I became proud. And then he walked in my office at the BBT, and some devotees, some of the leaders back then were explaining about what I was doing, the service I was doing for the BBT. And Prabhupada looked me over head to foot, like scrutinizing, who is this character? And then let out a long sound. That was the only sound I got from Srila Prabhupada. So you cling to that. The cookie in the hand, and then he pushed down on my hand, and I knew it was longer than anyone else's got that they received. And then the sound. Long, drawn-out sound. So then I explained to him my service, what I was doing, going through his manuscripts and making sure the editors had done properly. And he didn't say anything, he just gave me the Indian head shake. That was glorious. Just a head shake and a sound. So I'm sure so many Prabhupada's disciples can tell you about some little incident they had with Srila Prabhupada that touched their whole life and became unforgettable. So again, therefore we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. It's so counterintuitive, that sounds, doesn't it? Physicality is everything, especially in Kali Yuga. Anything physical is exalted, but we're being trained in a different way. And you can see that in Srila Prabhupada's disciples who have so determinedly carried out his instructions to maintain his mission. He said, if you can't increase the mission as he's left it, then at least maintain it. So, yes, best to expand, but at least maintain. And I offer my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada's disciples who are not only maintaining, which is quite an accomplishment, but also expanding. The Bhagavad Gita, we'll continue. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, is the Vani of Lord Krishna. Although Krishna was personally present 5,000 years ago and is no longer physically present from the materialistic point of view, the Bhagavad Gita continues. So here we are getting further insight into the potency of the Vani. Bhagavad Gita is the Vani of Krishna. And as Prabhupada would often explain, you can therefore get the same benefit by reading Bhagavad Gita properly as you'll get by Krishna's Vapu, association with his personal form. What do you think of that? Do you think that when you read Bhagavad Gita, this is the same benefit available to me as if Krishna his form is right in front of me? But this is the reality of the spiritual dimension. It's up to us, of course, to make progress in realizing that reality. But Prabhupada has no doubts. Although from the materialistic point of view, Krishna is no longer physically present, the Bhagavad Gita continues. The potential for associating with Krishna through Bhagavad Gita continues. And then he goes down memory lane, as they say, a bit. In this connection, we may call to memory the time when I was fortunate enough to meet His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada sometime in the year 1922. Srila Prabhupada had come to Calcutta from Sridham, Mayapur to start the missionary activities of the Gaudiya Math. He was sitting in a house at Ultadanga. You can go to that house today and go up on the roof, and there you'll see the spot where Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I recommend everyone to visit that tirtha. For me, at least personally, it was the most powerful experience of visiting a tirtha I ever had. When through the inducement of an intimate friend, the late Sriman Narendranath Mulik, I had the opportunity to meet His Divine Grace for the first time. I do not remember the actual date of the meeting, but at that time I was one of the managers of Dr. Bose's laboratory in Calcutta. I was a newly married young man, addicted to Gandhi's movement and dressed in khadi. Fortunately, even at our first meeting, His Divine Grace advised me to preach the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in English in the Western countries. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada explains that he had some doubts. And you can see that he's presenting himself in all humility. He once explained that doubting is the sign of intelligence until you're in contact with an authorized source of knowledge. Then doubting is foolish. So he was expressing his doubts. Because at that time I was a complete nationalist, a follower of Mahatma Gandhi's. I submitted to His Divine Grace that unless our country, India, were free from foreign subjugation, no one would hear the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu seriously. Of course, we had some argument on this subject. But at last I was defeated and convinced that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message is the only panacea for suffering humanity. I was also convinced that the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was then in the hands of a very expert devotee, and that surely the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would spread all over the world. So he had no doubts. Srila Prabhupada had no doubts that this is going to happen. The message of Mahaprabhu will spread all over the world. And then he receives the instruction that he should do something to bring this about. But then he explains, I could not, however, immediately take up his instructions to preach. But I took his words very seriously and was always thinking of how to execute his order, although I was quite unfit to do so. So Prabhupada explained that during his householder life, and of course you know that he didn't take initiation formally until 11, 12, 13 or so years later after this meeting on the rooftop with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But he explained, at that moment of the meeting with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he took the instructions of the Guru into his heart. That is real initiation. As I often explain at initiation yajnas, real initiation can happen before the ceremony, during the ceremony, after the ceremony, or not at all, because real initiation is in the heart. The ceremony is not just a formality, but the ceremony doesn't make for a lack of taking the order of the Guru, the instructions of the Guru into the heart. So Prabhupada explained to us that from that moment on the rooftop of Ultadanga, he took the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur into his heart and never forgot them. He's always thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And note how he considers himself unfit. Generally, we, with our pride, our Kali Yuga pride, think, well, I've got so many talents, so many abilities. Why don't devotees recognize that? Why don't they give me a post? Give me a leadership position. I'm so competent. What are those leaders doing anyway? I could do better than them. But here's Prabhupada. Although I was quite unfit. In this way, I passed my life as a householder until 1950, when I retired from family life as a vanaprastha. You know the history, how he wanted a higher standard of bhakti in his home. He described that his wife was more or less kind of a nice Hindu standard, but he wanted laser-like bhakti in his home. He would describe how he would have bhakti vriksha, namhata meetings in his home, and his wife would just go upstairs. So Prabhupada took that very seriously. Some of you might say, well, she was supportive or she didn't hinder him. She wasn't supportive, but she didn't hinder him. She just wasn't around. But Prabhupada took that very seriously. And he took it very seriously that she was a tea drinker. You would say, well, a bit of tea, a bit of garlic, a few onions. He wanted a certain standard in his home. So one day he told her, as he's up in his years, note that he did his family duty. He didn't leave prematurely. The Vedas say, Pancha Survam Vanam Vraje. He followed the classic Vedic system. When you're 50, you go. That assumes that your sons have grown up. They're able to take care of the mother. So it's not that he left irresponsibly. He took it as timing, divine timing, that she's the way she is, time for me to go. So, you know the famous incident where he said to her, look, about the tea drinking. He took it very seriously. It's either tea or me. And she just immediately replied, I'll take the tea. He took it very seriously. And especially when he came home from a business trip and found that she had taken his Srimad Bhagavatam, his one-volume Srimad Bhagavatam, taken it to the market and traded it for tea biscuits. That was the last straw. So he writes, in this way I passed my life as a householder until 1950, when I retired from family life as a vanaprastha. With no companion, I loitered here and there until 1958, when I took sannyas. Then I was completely ready to discharge the order of my spiritual master. Previously, in 1936, just before His Divine Grace passed away at Jagannath Puri, I wrote him a letter asking what I could do to serve him. He's demonstrating how to be an ideal disciple. What can I do to serve you? How can I best serve for your pleasure? In reply, he wrote me a letter dated 13th December 1936, ordering me in the same way as he did on the rooftop when they first met, in the same way to preach in English the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as I had heard it from him. I've been thinking about this point, this latter part, very much lately. To preach as I've heard it from him. Now, Srila Prabhupada did not preach in the language of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. If you ever read anything by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his English is just from another world. But Prabhupada took all his themes and put them into his own words. So if you are ever able to have the time to read about the preaching of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his message, you'll see that Prabhupada took his themes, and you'll see such fidelity. This Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that terminology comes from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Prabhupada wouldn't back down about that. Some said, just say the divine, or just say God. No, Krishna. So he stuck to the themes of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and put them in his own words. As I had heard it from him, he writes. His guru, Bhaktisiddhanta, ordered him preach in English according to what I had heard from him. So this is parampara. This is the process of disciplic succession. After he passed away, which we all will do, I started the fortnightly magazine Back to Godhead sometime in 1944 and tried to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this magazine. So the Back to Godhead magazine was Prabhupada's attempt to fulfill the order of his spiritual master. It was a home production and later became a solitary production of his when he left home and moved to Vrindavan. Sometimes there's discussion about, well, especially in BBT circles, but also amongst the congregation for those who have that interest. What's happening with Back to Godhead magazine? What's its purpose? And I remember during my times filing Prabhupada's letters, I remembered vaguely one letter where he explained very clearly what the purpose of Back to Godhead magazine is, but I couldn't remember it exactly, and I wasn't sure how he said it. And then one night, in the middle of the night, it came to me. To expose their materialistic ideas as all nonsense and to present the knowledge as Lord Krishna teaches. That is the purpose of BTG. And so I found that in his letters in the database, those exact words. That's the purpose, to expose their materialistic ideas as all nonsense and present the real knowledge as Lord Krishna teaches. After I took sannyas, a well-wishing friend suggested that I write books instead of magazines. Magazines, he said, might be thrown away, but books remain perpetually. Then I attempted to write Srimad Bhagavatam. Before that, when I was a householder, I had written on Srimad Bhagavad Gita and had completed about 1,100 pages. But somehow or other the manuscript was stolen. Unbelievable. If you have any idea of what it takes to write an 1,100-page manuscript and then it's gone, you would probably say, hey, forget it. That's it. What a disaster. I always wonder, what was that person who stole it thinking? In any case, when I had published Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto in 3 volumes in India, I thought of going to the USA. Now remember, Prabhupada describing his years in Vrindavan. He said, don't think I was there doing nothing. I was waiting for the right time to come to the West. So, Prabhupada's disciples can remember what they were doing the day Srila Prabhupada arrived in the USA in New York. Another monumental day. I remember I was just 1 month shy of 15 years old. If only I had met Srila Prabhupada when I was 15. If only I had met him if I was 5. Since then, I have translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that says Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada, speaking briefly about Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Prabhupada started translating it. He did the first 25 verses, which he printed as installments in Back to Godhead magazine, his India version, before he came to the U.S. So, as many of you know, the BBT has taken Srila Prabhupada's start on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and completed it. It'll come out in 5 massive volumes. Fascinating text by Rupa Goswami. So he's saying, since that time when I've come to New York, I've translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam. For me, personally, that was monumental, because that's the first time I ever said a word to a devotee. I walked up to a devotee in a bus terminal and said, do you have Srimad Bhagavatam? I had heard about those 3 volumes. I had heard that now, for the first time, there'd be a westernized, very flash rendition of those first 3 volumes. So I was determined I have to get those books. Of course, the rest is another story. I asked, do you have Srimad Bhagavatam? And then I was, by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, I was bereft of, in today's financial equivalents, $20,000. So that's, for me, how Srila Prabhupada's presentation of Srimad Bhagavatam, even those first 3 volumes in the first canto, is so important. So we continue. In the meantime, I was induced to translate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and publish it in an elaborate version. So Chaitanya Charitamrita was finished by Prabhupada in November of 1974. And by June of 1975, he was very angry. Where are those books? I finished. Why aren't these books coming out? So the word was coming out from wherever Prabhupada was visiting, Hawaii, Iran, this place, that place, where are the books? Where are the books? The BBT, this is before I joined the BBT, they were producing about one book every 6 months. And Prabhupada was not pleased at all. So finally, when he came to Los Angeles in June or July of 75, he gave the famous ultimatum. The devotees, hearing about his wrath, had assembled such a progressive plan. The top managers, hearing that Prabhupada was displeased, came up with a plan how to increase from one volume published every 6 months to one volume every month. Massive increase. Surely Prabhupada will be so happy. They very proudly, on a morning walk, presented it to him. Prabhupada, we have magnificently increased the pace from one book every 6 months to one book every month. All glories, ki jai. Prabhupada shocked the daylights out of them. No. I want all the books, plus fifth canto, all 17 volumes in 2 months. For a manager, this was incomprehensible. It's like someone telling His Holiness Ramai Swami, the Sydney renovation completion has to be done in 6 months. It was... He says, a good idea. But 6 months? So the minds of the managers and the BBT staff just fractured. This made no sense at all, materially. It was incomprehensible. They thought, hey, is he serious? And you couldn't say, well, I think it's time to find a Siksha guru, because Prabhupada was the only one. He couldn't run away. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So just think, they had presented Prabhupada with a plan how to go from one book every 6 months to one book a month. What's that? What increase is that? Who's quick at mathematics? Gaurapriya? Anyone? What? Huh? 6 times. 6-fold increase. Not doubling it, but 6 times. No. I want all... And he piled on. Not only Chaitanya Charitamrita, I want the 5th canto too. All in 2 months. Otherwise, and he said it very strongly. In the West, it's not a strong word, but in India, it's a very strong word. Otherwise, you all are rascals. We took that to mean, I cut you off. So I remember the panic. And then finally, the managers wrapped their minds around the instruction, even though it made no sense to them. It looked totally impossible. And they, overnight, brainstormed, came up with a plan, and presented it to Prabhupada. They said, I think we can do it. I think we can do it. From that moment, when they finally accepted the order, they finally accepted the order. From that moment, you could feel an energy descend from Vaikuntha. Because otherwise, this impossibility could never be achieved. So for 2 months, everyone was like, on the BBT staff, was existing in another dimension, created by Srila Prabhupada's order. Unforgettable experience. So he demanded 2 months, all the books. That meant we were working 24/7. Even the artists, you know how artists are. If anyone here an artist? No artists here. Yes, Janapavana. Oh, that's right. You gave me a painting of Srila Prabhupada. The artists, they're so attached to what they do, and they so much meditate on their productions, their artistic productions. So during this 2 months, the artists would, those paintings you see in Chaitanya Charitamrita, an artist would be starting the painting, 12 hours doing painting, and then doze off. When he woke up, some other artist had come in and finished the painting. For an artist, that's like worse than death. Hey, what happened to my painting? Who did this? My painting. I remember my service was to read Chaitanya Charitamrita 12 hours a day and spot any typographic mistakes or anything that was not clear. It's like taking a physics exam at the university 12 hours every day straight. Somehow or other, miraculously, this task was accomplished. So I remember, because I heard from the devotee who did this. He told me directly. He flew to the printer in the USA, because at that time all the books were printed in the USA, and got the first copy of the last volume. Got the first copy right off the press, and flew to India immediately. Landed in Delhi, took a taxi to the Krishna Balaram Mandir, where Srila Prabhupada was celebrating his Vyasa Puja ceremony. Remember, Prabhupada had said, 2 months, everything finished. By my Vyasa Puja ceremony, wherever I am, I want the last book in my hand. So the devotee is triumphantly entering the Krishna Balaram Mandir with that last volume. What an extraordinary moment. Prabhupada is coming off the Vyasa-san, going back to his room. And so the devotee triumphantly follows him. And Prabhupada sits down in his room on the asana. The devotee pays his dandavats, holding the book out. Like, Prabhupada, we've done it. A miracle has happened. You could just visualize the demigods showering flowers, the Gandharvas dancing. Prabhupada, here it is. Prabhupada just took the book. You have promised before the Vyasa Puja ceremony. Now it is after. Finish. The devotee told me, he told me himself, this is what happened. And then, of course, later that night, Prabhupada wrote his famous letter to the BBT staff that by this effort, you'll all go back to Godhead. So here, of course, we have to hold on to the ticket Prabhupada gave us. It's not over. Some of those personalities didn't. They dropped their ticket. Hopefully they'll pick it up in a future lifetime. In the meantime, I was induced to translate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and publish it in an elaborate version. In his leisure time in later life, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would simply read Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. You may recall on the Jaladuta, on Prabhupada's way over from India to the U.S., when he experienced 2 heart attacks in a row. He said his only solace was Chaitanya Charitamrita. So here, Srila Prabhupada's explaining that it was Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada's favorite book. He used to say that there would be a time when foreigners would learn the Bengali language to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The work on this translation began about 18 months ago. Now, by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it is finished. In this connection, I have to thank my American disciples, especially Shriman Pradumna Das Adhikari, Shriman Nitai Das Adhikari, Shriman Jayadvaita Das Brahmachari, and many other boys and girls who are sincerely helping me in writing, editing, and publishing all these literatures. I think that His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by his words. Now this is expressed very simply, but don't overlook the utter depths of this bhakti explanation. Prabhupada is speaking humbly. I think that my Guru Maharaj is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by his words. He's not just presenting some theory. He's giving you the depths of his bhakti experience. Always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by his words. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tene Brahmahida Yat Adi Kavaye. Spiritual inspiration comes from within the heart, wherein the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his Paramatma feature, is always sitting with all his devotees and associates. It is to be admitted that whatever translation work I have done is through the inspiration of my spiritual master, because personally I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. He really thinks that about himself. Just like Kaviraj Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Jagai Madai Hoite Muni Se Lagishta Puri Shera Kita Hoite Muni Se Papishta. I'm more sinful than Jagai and Madai. If you know how sinful Jagai and Madai were. But how can Kaviraj Goswami say like that? Lower than a worm in stool. How can he say like that? Does he really mean it, or he's just writing poetry? Often when we're dealing with other devotees, we may say, Prabhu, I'm so fallen. But in our hearts we're thinking, actually, I'm the best. When will everyone notice how great I am? When will they give me a title? When will they give me a position? When will they give me followers? I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. I do not think myself a very learned scholar, but I have full faith in the service of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. If there is any credit to my activities of translating, it is all due to His Divine Grace. How attached he is, how he dedicates always everything to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Certainly, if His Divine Grace were physically present at this time, it would have been a great occasion for jubilation. But even though He is not physically present, I am confident that He is very much pleased by this work of translation. He was very fond of seeing many books published to spread the Krishna conscious movement. Therefore, our society, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, has been formed to execute the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Again, a declaration of parampara, disciplic succession. ISKCON has been formed to execute the order of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So it's not something that just appeared out of nowhere. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation. Enjoyment, you got it? Here's your chance. Everyone wants to enjoy. Have you considered to enjoy Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita? Just like Krishna book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Devotees used to pepper Srila Prabhupada with questions about why this and why that, and how could all those people fit into Dwarka or Mathura? What were the sanitation facilities for all these people? Finally, Prabhupada just said, look, Krishna book means read it and enjoy. Bas. He said the same thing about Nectar of Devotion, because devotees were asking him, what about this? What about that? He said, when you read Nectar of Devotion, Don't just dash off a letter. Swamiji, what is this? Swamiji, what is that? Read it, and at the right time, the realizations will come to you about what you're reading. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation, and I am glad to express my gratitude to the learned men in the Western countries who are so pleased with my work that they are ordering in advance all my books that will be published in the future. On this occasion, I therefore request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work to continue their cooperation fully, so that philosophers, scholars, religionists, and people in general all over the world will benefit by reading our transcendental literatures such as Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So I request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work to continue their cooperation fully. Sometimes cooperation is not easy. How to keep the diversity unified? It's a very monumental task, but it's the request of Srila Prabhupada. He was the cooperation Acharya. Sometimes to cooperate is harder than controlling the senses. But we try to do so because it's the order of Srila Prabhupada. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, dated November 10th, 1974, at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Hare Krishna Land, Juhu, Bombay. Srila Prabhupada ki. Do we have any questions? Or first, His Holiness Ramai Swami might want to say something? All right. Any questions? Yes.
There is a quote by Srila Prabhupada. He says that we've given you all the ideas. It's now up to you to take shape. Does that mean we do things different from
He's given the themes. He's given the seeds, and there are different ways that those seeds can be watered, but you take those seeds as your life and soul. Just like he said about reading his books. I recall this from filing his letters. Devotees always ask him, how to read your books? What's the best way to study? And he would reply the same thing every time. You want to read my books and preach? Then cram my purports. Cram into your brain my purports. Repeat them as they are, and gradually your own style will develop. But first, cram my purports into your consciousness and repeat them. And by doing that, because you're an individual, your own delivery style will emerge. Just like Prabhupada's delivery is different from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The vocabulary is different, but the themes are the same. So how to have diversity within unity? That's the real question. Anything else? Yes. first of all, it's miraculous that things have continued since Srila Prabhupada's departure. That shows you something. It generally doesn't, it actually has never happened in the world of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that the mission of the Guru continues onward 50 years or so after his departure. Well, we can talk frankly, just like I've spoken to leaders of the Gaudiya Math, and they just say right out, what's the big deal that we split after the departure of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur? It's normal, it's natural. What's the big deal? It's the way it is, you know? And they even say, it's Krishna's will. But as I said, Prabhupada was the togetherness cooperation founder Acharya. It's not easy to bring about agreement and cooperation in this day and age. You can talk to His Holiness Ramai Swami about how he labors amidst all the factions and, hey, do it this way. No, do it that way. Leave us alone. Hey, you're not doing enough for us. Anything else? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Question I had was that you spoke about how Prabhupada was maintained fidelity and how he was repeated simply what his spiritual master gave in terms of themes and in his own words. So my question is that I don't have much faith or trust in my way of speaking. So how can I come to that platform to be able to push the consciousness to others?
Again, Srila Prabhupada's instructions on how to preach, he repeated several times. Cram my purports and repeat them. And then in time, your own style will develop. You know what it means? Have you ever crammed in school? Like you got an exam tomorrow and you got to get that information into your head and you stay up all night memorizing. So he said, cram my purports. Repeat them as they are, and then gradually your own style will develop. Okay? All right. Last question.
When we talked about cooperation and and the instructions provided by Prabhupada to work together, in the entire world of differences. If there are differences, what's the most pleasant way of working through them?
What's the best way to work through differences? First, acknowledge that there will be differences and don't freak out when they emerge. Oh no, there are differences. The resolution, how to resolve that situation, actually can only be done by more Krishna consciousness. The material tendency is you accuse me or you disagree with me, where's my lawyer? But in bhakti, we try to see how each person is trying to fulfill the order of Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes we can't see it, but we try. And then there's patience required. And discussion, what would be the most pleasing for Srila Prabhupada? You have to have that mentality. Sometimes it's not resolved. The issue is not resolved immediately. Just like what Srila Prabhupada explained happened in a traditional Indian marriage. You're not a married man, are you? You've taken the cheaper option, huh? So in a traditional Indian marriage, he explained, in the morning, the wife says, that's it, I'm through, I'm out of here. And the husband says, no, I'm leaving first. But then by evening, it's all resolved. Is it still like that? Maybe 5 years later, it's resolved. Huh? So he said that's the traditional Indian marriage. That in the morning they say we're splitting. In the evening, everything is forgotten. It's all patched up. So arguments amongst devotees, he said, should be like that. There are going to be differences. Just like the family people here know, there are differences. You don't talk about it in public, of course. That's not the Bharat style. But there are differences. But you resolve them. It may take some time. But you're committed to staying together. That's the important thing. So on this disappearance day of Srila Prabhupada, let us try somehow to meditate on our limitless depth to Srila Prabhupada. I can truthfully say that the only thing that makes sense in my life is coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. Nothing else makes sense. Academically, financially, relationships, it doesn't make sense except for my coming in contact with Prabhupada's lotus feet. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj, for the wonderful class. As you know, Maharaj has written a few books. Bhakti Bhava is one of his books, and it is available here. And if you take it here, Maharaj is happy to sign it for you right now. So take that opportunity to grab a book and get it signed by Maharaj. Hare Krishna.